Dawn crept over eastern England, 1944. In the half-light, a row of Lancaster bombers sat motionless on the tarmac, their aluminum skins beating with dew. Mechanics moved like ghosts through the mist, tightening bolts, testing engines, writing initials in chalk on the side of bombs that would soon erase entire streets. Inside the mess hall, the air smelled of tea, oil, and nervous tobacco. Flight Lieutenant Jack Redding sat apart from the others, 26 years old, a quiet man with a mechanic's hands and a poet's patience. He reread a letter from his mother, the paper worn soft at the folds, then tucked it into the pocket of his flight jacket. Around him, the chatter of other crews tried to disguise the same thought everyone had. Some of us will not come back. Outside, a loudspeaker crackled the morning briefing. Target, a munitions plant near Rouen, northern France. Expected resistance, heavy. Flight time, 4 hours, maybe 5. They joked as they walked to the aircraft, the kind of jokes that came from habit, not humor. Back by dinner, one said. Hot tea waiting. The crew climbed aboard their machine, 7 men and 40,000 pounds of metal. The cockpit was a narrow cathedral of gauges and glass. Redding's fingers brushed over the levers, 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, each capable of 1,650 horsepower. The bomber's payload, 14,000 pounds of high explosive. No armor beneath the pilot's seat. At full throttle, the Lancaster Mark III could barely clear 200 miles per hour when fully loaded. A miracle of engineering and a coffin made of wood and faith. Engines ignited one by one. The sound rolled across the airfield like thunder wrapped in wind. Flames flickered from the exhaust stacks as the ground crew ducked low. Redding glanced to his right. His navigator, McAllister, gave a thumbs up. They had flown together for 17 missions. They never talked about the 18th. As the bomber lifted off, the clouds swallowed the light. England disappeared beneath a curtain of gray. Only the instruments remained, dials glowing amber, needles trembling. The hum of the engine settled into rhythm, hypnotic, almost peaceful. Below them, across the channel, the world was burning, but inside that aircraft there was a strange sense of stillness, as if the war existed elsewhere, and they were only observers passing through its smoke. For every man who flew that morning, one would not return. No one said it aloud, but the statistics flew with them. Through thin cloud breaks, Redding could see the faint curve of the earth, the dawn stretching across Europe. In those quiet minutes, before the first gunfire, war felt distant, almost abstract. He looked down at the river below, winding through villages that had survived centuries of conflict. He wondered if they would survive another day. Beside him, the flight engineer adjusted the throttle. McAllister plotted the first course correction. The bomber formation stretched across the horizon, a fleet of shadows in disciplined motion. And somewhere ahead, beyond the gray sky and the humming engines, waited a decision that would outlive all of them. For now, it was just another mission, the kind they had flown a dozen times before. But this one carried more than bombs. It carried fate, quietly ticking in the fuel lines. Night settled over the French coast like ink poured across glass. The hum of hundreds of engines filled the upper air, a sound so vast it no longer felt mechanical. It felt alive. Each bomber moved through a narrow corridor of darkness, invisible to the others except for the faint pulse of navigation lights blinking through cloud. Jack Redding's hands rested lightly on the controls. His voice, calm over the intercom, guided the crew through turbulence and radio static. Below them, Europe flickered in red pinpoints, tracer fire, and the burning remnants of cities already lost. Every few seconds, the black horizon lit up with the white bloom of anti-aircraft flak. It looked like a storm of stars exploding in reverse. "Flak ahead, 2 o'clock, McAllister's voice broke through. The altimeter needle trembled. Then came the first hit, a metallic clang somewhere in the fuselage, a flash of light, a smell of smoke. The aircraft jolted, banking hard to the left. Redding steadied it, instinct taking over where fear tried to intrude. Engine number. 3 was coughing, its temperature gauge spiking, fuel pressure dropping. He trimmed the rudder, eased the throttle, tried to keep formation. But the bomber was beginning to sink, slowly, stubbornly. Behind him, the wireless operator shouted through the smoke, "We're leaking fuel, skipper." Redding didn't reply, his eyes fixed on the glowing horizon. Rouen. They were still miles from target. The sky around them was chaos, searchlights stabbing upward, flak bursts pounding the air into shock waves. Bombers to their left and right were hit, spiraling down, leaving trails of fire that fell like meteors. Yet the formation pressed on, each plane a separate universe of noise and courage. Redding exhaled once, slowly. They had come this far. He wasn't turning back. "Bomb bay doors open." The command felt heavier than it sounded. Hydraulics hissed, the wind howled through the open belly. At 10,000 feet, McAllister's voice steadied. "Steady! Steady! Bombs away!" 14,000 pounds of explosive fell into the dark, their fuses counting down to fire. A distant bloom lit the horizon. The target struck. But triumph lasted only seconds. The damaged engine flared again, belching flame. They were losing altitude fast. The sky had no mercy left in it. The Lancaster was burning over occupied France, one engine gone, the others screaming at full power. Redding tried to climb, but the bomber felt heavy, sluggish, almost resentful. Below, the shapes of villages appeared, tiny clusters of rooftops glowing faintly in moonlight. McAllister shouted, "We can't hold it, Jack." "We're too low." The co-pilot's hands moved to the emergency hatch. Redding knew the procedure by heart. They all did. If the aircraft couldn't gain altitude, the order was to bail out, save the crew. But as he looked down, the dark outline of a church spire rose directly beneath them, surrounded by a dozen sleeping houses. If he let go now, the Lancaster would fall straight into the village. If he stayed at the controls, maybe, just maybe, he could steer it clear. "Get ready to jump," he said quietly. McAllister hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll keep her level." The Lancaster B Mark III's control system required both hands on the yoke to stabilize a one-engine-out descent. Its 2,000 gallons of aviation fuel ran through thin pipes beneath the floor, turning any spark into a funeral pyre. In those seconds, every part of the aircraft was both tool and trap. The tailgunner's voice crackled, broken by static. "I'm out. God be with you, skipper." One by one, parachutes opened behind the falling plane, drifting into the black. Inside the cockpit, Redding tightened his harness, the heat building behind him. The horizon tilted, glowing orange. He saw the church again, closer now, and beyond it, a patch of empty farmland. If he could just reach it. The bomber groaned, its frame bending against its own weight. Instruments failed one by one, altimeter, airspeed, oil pressure. Still, he fought the controls, forcing the machine to obey for a few more seconds. Somewhere inside the smoke, he whispered to no one. Not them. Not tonight. The Lancaster was dying. Every creak, every vibration in the frame spoke the same language. Time was running out. Redding's world had narrowed to the glow of his instruments and the heat behind his shoulders. Outside, the night bled orange. The engine fire had spread through the wing, licking at the fuselage like a living thing. Inside, the temperature rose past endurance. His gloves stuck to the throttle. the oxygen mask filled with the smell of burning rubber and cordite. Through the cracked canopy, he saw the fields below glinting faintly under moonlight, neat, geometric, fragile. And among them the village, a cluster of thatched roofs, a bell tower, a river threading through its center. He realized the bomber's trajectory, straight toward it. If he bailed out now, gravity would finish what the war had begun. Every house beneath would vanish in the explosion. Every sleeping child would never wake. Behind him, the radio crackled again, McAllister's voice faint from somewhere in the darkness. "Jack, jump! You've done enough. Jump!" But the words sounded distant, unreal. He could see the faces of his crew, the ones who had already fallen into the night, parachutes glowing faintly against the stars. He thought of their families. He thought of the ones below. And then, quietly, he made the choice. Not with words, not with ceremony, just with his hands. He pushed the throttles forward, locking them open. The engines screamed in protest, metal howling against metal. The aircraft tilted, its nose dipping slightly. He aimed for the open farmland beyond the church, trying to keep the bomber aloft long enough to clear the edge of the village. Every second stretched into eternity. In the cockpit, the flames turned everything gold and black, the color of endings. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing what must burn. At this stage, a Lancaster's fuel tanks, located in the inner wings, could detonate from a single spark. The pilot's only hope of controlling descent was countering torque with differential thrust, a maneuver nearly impossible with one engine dead and another aflame. But Redding did it. By instinct, by sheer will, he held the aircraft steady, wrestling with forces no man should have to measure. He felt the nose drop further, altitude bleeding away. The altimeter's needle spun wildly, unreadable in the smoke. The wind screamed through shattered glass. The world tilted, horizon and earth trading places. In those last seconds, he caught sight of the church again. The bell tower glimmered like a needle of silver. He banked the aircraft one final time, a motion so precise it could have been prayer. The Lancaster cleared the edge of the village by 50 yards. The farmland opened before him. Dark soil, pale fog. He exhaled once, the kind of breath a man gives to time itself. And then, light. A white, soundless flash tore through the horizon. The shockwave flattened the grass for miles. Windows shattered in the nearby town, and the people awoke to a sky that looked like dawn but wasn't. When rescue teams found the wreckage the next morning, it lay scattered across the empty field, still smoldering. The church and every home behind it stood untouched. No parachute was found. Just a watch, stopped at 2:14 a.m., and a half-burned letter in a jacket pocket that read, "Tell her I'll be home when the clouds are quiet again." Dawn came slowly over northern France. A pale fog rolled across the fields where the Lancaster had fallen. From the distance, it looked almost peaceful, a stretch of farmland glistening with dew, the wreckage hidden beneath a silver mist. The first to arrive were the villagers. They had spent the night in cellars, listening to the distant thunder of engines and explosions. When silence finally returned, they emerged to find the horizon smudged with smoke. At the edge of a wheat field, they saw what was left of the aircraft, a blackened skeleton of twisted metal, the ground scorched into glass. One wing had sheared off on impact. The fuselage split open like a crushed tin can. The smell of burned fuel lingered with the sweetness of wet earth. A farmer named Etienne Laurent was the first to understand what had happened. He had watched the bomber's descent from his window, the flames trailing like a comet, and seen it tilt away at the last moment, banking hard to miss the village. Now, standing at the crater's edge, he looked toward the church, still standing in the distance, its bell ringing softly in the morning breeze. Inside the church, the villagers gathered. They said nothing. Only the sound of the bell filled the silence, each toll a heartbeat for the man who had saved them. Hours later, soldiers from the local resistance arrived, followed by a British recovery team. They marked the crash site, searched for survivors, and found only fragments. A burned flight boot, a torn patch of uniform, a bent control yoke. Among the debris, a piece of the instrument panel still flickered faintly, a single bulb glowing through cracked glass. Crash investigators would later calculate that the aircraft struck at a shallow angle, 32 degrees, a maneuver almost unheard of in uncontrolled descent. The impact crater measured 30 meters across, but the blast radius of the remaining fuel extended only half that distance. By all physics, the bomber should have detonated instantly over the village. It didn't, because its pilot had kept it level until the very last fraction of a second. A military chaplain recorded the scene in his logbook. One man's death saved an entire town. The line between destruction and deliverance was drawn by his hands. For the villagers, the story spread quickly. The English pilot, who turned death aside. They placed wildflowers along the crater's edge and built a small wooden cross from pieces of the wreckage. No one knew his name yet, but they prayed for him as if he were their own. In England, at the same hour, an empty chair waited in the mess hall at RAF Binbrook. The chalkboard by the door read, Lancaster ED-934, missing. His crew, those who had parachuted to safety, were still being recovered by French partisans. When word reached them that their captain hadn't made it, none spoke. They simply stared at the ground. Sometimes history is written not by victors, but by witnesses. 2 weeks later, a telegram reached Redding's mother. It was short, almost mechanical. Your son is missing in action. Presumed lost over France, she folded it quietly, placed it beside his childhood photograph, and lit a candle that would burn long after the war was over. In France, the wooden cross weathered through rain and sun. Children grew up hearing the story from their grandparents, how one night a burning plane fell from the sky and spared their homes. They called it Le Miracle du Ciel Silencieux, the miracle of the silent. Years passed. The war ended, leaving behind ruins, ribbons, and rows of white crosses stretching to the horizon. Names filled the memorials faster than families could read them, and somewhere among those thousands, one name remained missing: Flight Lieutenant Jack Redding. In the official archives, his final mission was marked only as failed to return. No citation, no medal, just an entry on a list that grew longer by the day. But in a quiet corner of Normandy, the villagers of Saint-Martin-sur-Rouen tended a field that never grew wheat again. Each spring they placed flowers there, red poppies for courage, white lilies for peace. Children still ran past the old church, its bell repaired but never replaced. When they asked why the field was bare, their parents would point to the sky and whisper, because once an angel was made of iron. Across the channel, at an air museum in Lincolnshire, a curator discovered a forgotten report from 1944. It contained sketches of an impact angle, coordinates, and a single remark in pencil. Possible, deliberate diversion to avoid civilian casualties. No one signed it. No one followed it up. The war had moved too fast for such stories. The machine always moved faster than the man. Post-war engineering studies of Lancaster wrecks showed that at full fuel load, a nose-down crash produced a fireball over 300 feet wide. Redding's aircraft, found in fragments but not vaporized, proved he had pulled the nose level in the final second. A decision measured not in minutes, but in degrees, enough to turn annihilation into survival. The cost of a miracle is usually paid in silence. Decades later, the Royal Air Force verified the coordinates. A historian traced the crew logs, the testimonies, the telegrams, and for the first time, the full story aligned. The bomber that crashed to save a village. The British government issued a posthumous commendation, understated as always, for exceptional airmanship and devotion to duty. His mother never saw it. She had passed long before the file was reopened. But her candle still burned in the family home, its wax fused to the table like time itself. In France, the villagers built a new memorial from the remains of his aircraft, a twisted propeller mounted on stone. Every year on the anniversary of the crash, they gather at dusk. The old survivors bring photographs. The young bring silence. The bell rings once, the same sound it made the morning after. And as it fades, they look toward the horizon, where contrails cross the same sky that once burned. War has many faces, the generals, the flags, the victories carved into marble. But sometimes it is just one man in a burning cockpit, steering toward mercy instead of survival. A single act no camera saw, no newspaper printed, yet it changed the shape of a village, and perhaps the soul of a war. When historians speak of strategy, they mention numbers, bomb tonnage, sorties, loss rates. They rarely speak of moments like this, a pilot alone in the dark, choosing where death will fall. Today, the crater has softened into a meadow. Wildflowers grow where fire once lived. The air smells of earth, not smoke. And if you stand there long enough, in the quiet between the bell's echoes, you might hear it, the faint hum of engines carried by the wind, not as memory, as promise. He never made it home, but home was what he saved.